Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army.
We have such an incredible story to get into today.
We really do. So, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I want you to start by picturing a scene and try to really place yourself in the sensory details here.
Set the stage for us.
Okay, so it's the early 1890s. We are deep in the slums of Omaha, Nebraska. It's late at night. The streets are, unpaved, muddy, just genuinely dangerous.
Right, not somewhere you'd casually take a walk.
Exactly. And a 45-year-old woman named Martha Lee, though basically everyone just calls her Mother Lee, walks up to the door of this notorious, dimly lit brothel.
And she doesn't try to sneak in, right?
No, she doesn't even knock. She literally just turns the handle and walks right in.
Which, just the visual contrast of that moment is staggering.
Oh, completely. The sources describe her wearing this long, stark black dress, heavily gathered at the waist, and she has this stiff, starched white collar band on.
So she looks intensely out of place.
Very much so. Her face is stern, lips pressed tight, and she walks directly into the main gathering room. There are young women everywhere, smoking, drinking, playing cards, reading dime novels.
Just a typical night.
Right. And Mother Lee doesn't apologize at all. She stands right in the center, starts handing out gospel tracts, and boldly announces she's there to tell them about the love of Jesus.
And the reaction from the room is it's immediate. It's this visceral defensive mechanism that bubbles up.
Yeah, the text uses a really specific phrase here. It says, "A hollow, mocking laugh erupts from almost all 9 women at the exact same time."
Wow.
The author actually notes it was a laugh that, quote, would have done credit to the inhabitants of the lower regions.
So it was meant to be intimidating.
Exactly. It's meant to drive her out. But she doesn't flinch. She just holds her ground and keeps talking.
That takes some serious nerve.
Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And as she speaks, the laughter slowly dies down. It gets quiet. And finally, one of the young women stammers out a question.
And this is the question that kind of alters everything, isn't it?
It changes the entire trajectory of American social history. The girl asks, "You don't mean to say that God can save such as we are, that there is hope either in this world or the one to come for those fallen as low as we are?"
That is that vulnerability is the absolute pivot point. It's the catalyst for the entire movement we're unpacking today.
Yeah, because the question didn't just fade away. Mother Lee wrote in her autobiography about how her heart physically ached right then.
She wanted to take them with her right in that moment.
Right. Her instinct was to say, pack your things, let's go start a new life. But she hits this terrifying realization. There was literally nowhere for them to go.
The women at those card tables explained the reality to her. They had no shelter, no income, no social standing outside that room. They literally had to remain there.
Society had basically built a trap, put them in it, and locked the door from the outside. If you were a so-called fallen woman in the 1890s, there was no exit strategy.
None whatsoever. And that stark realization sparked this massive movement. Mother Lee and dozens of other women across the country facing this exact same horror decided if society wasn't going to build a refuge, they would build it themselves.
Which is our mission for today's deep dive. We're looking at a really fascinating, sometimes controversial chapter of the progressive era. Women evangelists building vast networks of rescue homes using a formula of soap, soup, and salvation.
Right. They answered that girl's question with brick and mortar.
I want to look at Mother Lee's sheer grit because her immediate actions after that night are wild. She doesn't form a committee or do a 3-year fundraising study.
No time for bureaucracy.
None. She finds a local widow with young kids and convinces her to let her use some empty rooms to start a rescue mission.
Just think about the audacity of that pitch. Hey, let me bring women from the brothels into your family home.
Right. But it works. And she moves so fast. By 1892, she incorporates her rescue work, rents a massive 9-room house on Bancroft Street in Omaha, right by the railroad and the river.
Which is highly strategic. That's exactly where desperate, transient people would arrive.
Exactly. And she doesn't stop in Omaha. She expands to Wichita, Kansas, and then starts the Goodwill Mission in Kansas City.
And the location she picks in Kansas City tells you everything about her philosophy.
Hell's Half Acre.
Hell's Half Acre. The name says it all. It was this volatile, unregulated sanctuary for thugs, drifters from the train depot, sex workers.
Most reformers would have set up in a nice neighborhood and said, hey, come to us.
Exactly. But she put her mission in the absolute epicenter of the danger, literally in plain sight of the brothels. She could see the girls from her windows.
Which really forces us to ask who these women actually were. Because usually when you think of progressive era reformers, you picture like the elite.
Right, wealthy socialites. The Vanderbilts or Carnegies doing philanthropy from a safe distance.
Yeah, but the sources emphasize that women like Mother Lee were part of organized womanhood.
And that's a crucial distinction. We're talking working class or solidly middle class evangelical Protestant women. They didn't have massive wealth.
No, they used grassroots organizing and sheer willpower. And their personal backgrounds are fascinating. A lot of them came to this work later in life after these really dramatic spiritual conversions.
Or intense experiences of physical healing.
Yes. Mother Lee's story completely shattered my image of a Victorian evangelist. She didn't start this until she was in her mid-40s. And before her, what she called her sanctification. She smoked a pipe for 12 years.
I love that detail. But it's more than just a historical quirk. In the 19th century holiness movement, tobacco use was seen as a major moral failing, a physical sign of an unsanctified life.
And it had apparently left her physically debilitated, which she felt was hindering her from doing God's work.
Right, and she recounts this moment of intense prayer where she felt a healing power go through her, making her completely whole.
It's that theology of sanctification, right?
Exactly. The Wesleyan holiness tradition believes sanctification is the second work of grace after salvation. It purifies the heart and empowers you for service.
So for her, losing the desire for tobacco, her physical healing, and spiritual renewal were all one miraculous event.
And the God who possessed the power to rescue her was explicitly calling her to use that healed body to rescue others.
Her own redemption became the fuel to redeem everyone else. And she wasn't the only one. Emma Whitmore, Emma Ray, Florence Roberts, they all operated from this same dramatic personal transformation.
Which profoundly shaped how they actually did the work. They used this specific three-word formula.
SOAP, soup, salvation.
The order of those words is everything.
Let's really analyze that. These women are consumed by religious fire, right? They think eternal souls are at stake. You'd assume salvation would be the very first word out of their mouth.
And a lot of conservative religious folks back then argued it absolutely should be. They thought focusing on the physical was a distraction.
But Mother Lee and her peers were pragmatists.
Supreme pragmatists. They lived in the slums. They knew you can't successfully preach eternal salvation to someone who hasn't eaten in 3 days and is covered in street filth.
Yeah, the physical suffering creates a massive cognitive barrier.
Exactly. You can't comprehend spiritual concepts when your body is screaming for survival.
It's like trying to teach a drowning person how to swim while they're actively swallowing water and going under.
Perfect analogy.
Right. Like you can stand on the dock and shout instructions about the backstroke all day, but they are panicking. You have to pull them into the boat first.
You give them a blanket, let their heart rate settle, let them know they're safe.
And only then do you talk about navigating the water. So the soap is dignity and hygiene, the soup is survival, and then...
The salvation component actually has some fertile ground to take root.
But I'm honestly a little hung up on the ethics of this sequence.
Yeah.
Does this make their charity totally transactional? Were they basically holding a bowl of soup hostage until someone agreed to listen to a sermon?
That is the central vibrating tension of this whole era. If you asked the women, they'd vehemently deny it was cynical or transactional.
They saw it as holistic.
Completely. They believed a hot meal was a temporary fix, but saving the soul was the permanent solution. To them, feeding the body but letting the soul go to hell was the ultimate cruelty.
Okay, I see that. But to a modern observer, or even a secular person back then, it looked pretty conditional and manipulative.
It really did. And that friction over how to deliver charity is fascinating. But to understand it, we have to look at how they even justified doing this public work.
Right, because society at the time was all about the cult of domesticity.
Exactly. The idea that a woman's God-ordained sphere was strictly the private home, piety, purity, raising kids, public life was for men.
The boundaries were so rigid. Stay in your lane, keep the parlor clean. But these rescue workers found this massive structural loophole called maternalism.
It was a brilliant political maneuver. They didn't attack the cult of domesticity directly. They accepted the premise, but insisted their divine duty was to take those female skills, nurturing, cleaning, and apply them to the slums.
It's genius. They basically said, look, if society says my calling is to be a mother and a housekeeper, then God is obligating me to mother the abandoned street kids and clean up the filthiest alleys.
Try arguing with that in a Victorian city council meeting.
You can't. They took the chains society used to hold them back and turned them into keys. And they fully embraced the branding. They all went by mother, Mother Lee, Mother Whitmore.
They weren't calling themselves corporate presidents or radical agitators. They were surrogate mothers to the poor.
Which dictated how they designed their missions. Emma Whitmore refused to make her rescue homes feel like cold state asylums. She decorated them to feel like actual middle-class homes.
They taught domestic survival skills, cooking, cleaning, mending, plus religious instruction and Bible study.
I really want to focus on Emma Ray here, because her story is so gritty and beautiful. She was an African-American woman doing this in Kansas City in a place called Hicks Hollow.
She basically became the stay-at-home mom for the entire neighborhood.
Yeah, when the poor mothers had to go work, the kids would just flock to Emma Ray. She fed them, watched them, and then invited them back for Sunday school.
And when she moved to Seattle, she adapted this maternalism to a much more dangerous demographic. She started visiting jails.
Oh, this part is wild. When these hardened men got released with absolutely nothing, she invited them right into her own private home.
She cooked for them, washed their clothes, gave them clean beds, and the only rule was they had to go to church with her.
She was literally mothering convicts.
Yeah.
There's this one detail in the text that just completely arrested my attention. She took in this released prisoner, and she goes to wash his old coat.
The coat that was full of vermin.
Full of vermin. Imagine the stench, the physical revulsion of handling a bug-infested coat back before modern sanitation. But she takes a scrub board and just starts aggressively washing it.
And she's singing while she does it.
She throws her head back and belts out a hymn. She's doing the most repulsive labor imaginable, and she's joyful. And the man watching her is so shaken by this raw act of maternal love that he just starts sobbing.
He sought her out years later to say he never forgot what God did in his heart in that exact moment.
It perfectly encapsulates maternalism. But the sources point out how radically different this was from the earlier 19th century women evangelists.
Right, women like Dorina Lee in the early 1800s. For them, domestic duties and a divine calling were in direct conflict.
The sources use the phrase breaking up housekeeping.
Exactly. Dorina Lee wrote about leaving her violently ill young son to travel 30 miles on foot to preach. She had to force herself not to think of him, terrified it would distract her from God's work.
That is a staggering psychological burden. They felt they had to abandon the home to save the world.
But the progressive era women flipped that completely. They weaponized housekeeping. They packed up the concept of the home and moved it to the slums.
Okay, but I have a major question here. Was this whole maternalism thing a genuine reflection of their values? Or was it a really strategic Trojan horse? Like, were they just playing the mother card to get permission to do disruptive public work?
Historians debate this constantly. Honestly, it seems like it was both.
Yeah.
The maternal affection was clearly genuine. You can't fake scrubbing vermin out of a coat. But they were also incredibly savvy political operators. They knew if they marched in demanding structural power, the patriarchy would crush them.
But no man in power wants to argue with a weeping mother who just wants to clean an alley.
Exactly. It bypassed the gatekeepers brilliantly. But they weren't operating in a vacuum. They were competing with two very different secular approaches to urban poverty.
Right, the great progressive era debate. 3 different ways to help the poor. Let's walk down a tenement block in the 1890s. We'd see settlement houses, the Charity Organization Society, and our rescue missions. Let's start with the settlement houses.
These are famous, think Jane Addams and Hull House. Highly educated, middle-class workers living directly in the slums. Their philosophy was immersive presence in education. They built playgrounds, taught job skills.
Sounds incredibly holistic. Why did they clash with the rescue missions?
It was all about religion. Settlement workers wanted neutral territory. Mary E. McDowell, a major figure, had total disdain for rescue missions. She said where a mission saw a sinner needing salvation, a settlement house saw a citizen needing enfranchisement.
So no religious propaganda at all. They wanted to build citizens.
Okay, what about the second group? The Charity Organization Society, or COS. The sources talk about Josephine Shaw Lowell, and her theories are genuinely chilling to read.
The COS approach is the bedrock of modern bureaucracy. They believe giving free food or coal without strict conditions actually caused poverty. Lowell explicitly said that giving a man an unearned gift causes moral deterioration.
Moral deterioration. She's saying that taking a free sandwich makes your soul fundamentally worse. That is such a bleak view of humanity. They saw poverty as a moral failing, laziness, or intemperance. So they deployed these friendly visitors to investigate applicants.
Friendly visitors is such a misnomer. They were investigators. The sources say they probed into your debts, your kids' manners, your cleaning skills, even your recreational tastes.
It was intense surveillance to separate the deserving from the undeserving poor.
It sounds like applying for a mortgage just to get a bowl of soup. And people hated this, right? There was that poem in the text about a cautious statistical Christ. What does that mean?
It's a brilliant theological critique. They're accusing the COS of blasphemy. The biblical Jesus fed multitudes without checking their employment history. A statistical Christ is a petty accountant who only doles out grace if your moral credit score is high enough.
That perfectly strips bare the arrogance of it. So how did the rescue missions respond to that?
With total hostility. They practiced indiscriminate charity. They didn't care if you were deserving. If you were hungry, they fed you.
There's that big public feud between Lowell and Frederick Booth Tucker of the Salvation Army.
Yes. The Salvation Army wanted to build more shelters, and Lowell publicly complained it would just attract vagrants. She said a man has no right to be homeless.
And Booth Tucker's response was just savage. He said, men starve while their agents are spending money finding out who they are.
A total demolition of the COS philosophy.
Absolutely. The settlement houses wanted citizens, the COS wanted the deserving poor, and the missions just saw drowning people. But this brings up a huge question. What was their actual theological justification for the soup and soap?
To understand that, we have to look at Ava Durham Vennard. She was a brilliant intellect in this movement, and she used a phrase that's pretty uncomfortable to modern ears. She called the humanitarian aid the bait on the hook for evangelism.
She gave this commencement speech in 1890 with this vivid maritime metaphor. She said everyone is in lifeboats launched for eternity, surrounded by whirlpools of temptation.
Right. Envy, greed, lust.
And the evangelist's job is just to steer the boats to God's harbor.
For her, eternal life or eternal damnation was a binary choice. Fixing a temporary earthly problem was nice, but it wasn't the goal. She believed sin was at the bottom of all poverty.
Right, she said all the compassionate service is just the bait on the hook to catch the fish, but we haven't landed the fish until they meet Jesus.
It's bluntly transactional, and it put her in direct conflict with the social gospel movement.
Yeah, Josiah Strong and John Marvin Dean, they looked at the same slums and had a totally different read.
They believed the church's mandate was to transform the corrupt society itself, not just pluck individuals out.
John Marvin Dean wrote that book trying to bridge the gap. He criticized the premillennialists like D.L. Moody, who viewed the world as a wrecked vessel.
Moody said God gave him a lifeboat and said, save all you can. He wasn't trying to fix the sinking ship.
But Dean also criticized the modernists who only cared about social service and forgot about grace and sin. Dean wanted individual salvation, but he also publicly condemned vampire department stores that refused to pay living wages.
And that structural critique was totally missing from Vennard's worldview. She looked at the individual sinner. Dean looked at the sinful economic system.
Let's talk about the reality of this bait on the hook on the street level. Our sources mention a Chinese bishop talking about rice Christians.
Right, people who convert just for the material incentives like rice or medical care. Or in Omaha, a hot bowl of soup.
This power dynamic really bothers me. If you're a starving young woman in a freezing tenement, and a woman in a black dress has the only food in the district, you'll agree to whatever theology she wants. You'll sing the hymns. Isn't that inherently predatory?
It's a very valid modern critique, but to understand them, you have to inhabit their terrifying worldview. To them, it wasn't manipulation, it was emergency medicine.
How so?
Imagine you have the cure to a terminal disease, but the patient won't take it because their leg is broken and they're in pain. You set the leg, not because you care most about the leg, but so they'll sit still and take the life-saving cure. They genuinely believed hell was real. If soup was the leverage to save someone from eternal torment, then withholding it, or giving it without the message, was spiritual malpractice.
That really reframes it. They saw themselves as frantic emergency responders. And to see how far they went to reach people, we have to look inside the missions and their visitation tactics.
Their methods were incredibly brave and dangerous.
The disguises. Emma Whitmore and the Salvation Army Slum Sisters. They knew if they walked into a slum-looking middle class, everyone would just clam up or hide.
So they used sociological camouflage. Whitmore wore a heavy, patched calico dress, a faded shawl, a totally out-of-style black straw hat, and carried a battered tin pail of soup.
Carrie Judd Montgomery actually wrote that when she wore nice clothes, she got a wall of silence. But in ragged clothes, she was welcomed into the darkest cellars.
And the encounters they had were intense. The story of Delia is just wild.
The Mulberry Slum Bummer.
Yes, she had 3 street names. The Mystery, because the cops couldn't catch her. The Mulberry Slum Bummer. And Bluebell.
She was a deeply battered 23-year-old. When she met Whitmore, Delia was openly hostile. She stalked her through the hallways, mocking her, bragging she wasn't afraid of God or the devil.
She was projecting pure armor. And Whitmore doesn't preach at her. She turns around, hands her a pink rose, points at Delia's chest, and asks, "Tell me truly, is there any laughter down there?"
It's a masterclass in psychology. She bypasses the bravado and hits the core trauma. Delia breaks down, converts, and goes to the Door of Hope mission.
She only lived 11 more months, tragically. The streets had destroyed her body.
But her funeral, it was the largest in New York City history at the time, behind only President Grant's. Hardened criminals like Murphy converted on the spot because of the peace on her face in the casket.
It's this beautiful example of relational, emotional redemption. But history shifted. As the 20th century approached, these grassroots rescue homes turned into institutional maternity homes.
The National Florence Crittenton mission is the prime example. It went from emotional evangelism to scientific casework.
The social workers reclassified the residents. They went from being erring sisters to be saved to problem girls to be treated. Mothers became caseworkers.
And the founders hated this. Mother Lee and Mother Roberts literally quit because of the bureaucracy.
Mother Lee was told she couldn't admit a black girl into the Kansas City home without special permission from the president, while white girls were admitted instantly.
Which broke her conscience. She quit to start an open-door mission. And Mother Roberts had to quit because they started demanding entrance interviews and financial fees from the girls.
A girl actually looked at Roberts and said, "Didn't you say the home was free? Then you lied. It broke her heart."
The irony is so tragic.
Yeah.
The Crittenton homes tried to be professional, and they became the exact bureaucratic gatekeepers they used to fight. They became the statistical Christ.
Exactly. And they were doing this while trying to navigate an economy rigged against women.
The systemic failures are horrifying. Jacob Riis pointed out that men's wages had a floor, but women's wages didn't. Employers paid practically nothing because, as Riis said, the paths of shame are always open to her.
It was a calculated structural subsidy. Factory owners knew their wages couldn't cover food and rent, but they assumed the women would just sell their bodies at night to survive.
Emma Whitmore told the story of Julia, a 17-year-old working in a Brooklyn department store for $3 a week. She had to buy nice clothes for work, leaving her with 50 cents a week for food and coal. She was freezing and starving, and her own floor supervisor lured her into prostitution.
Whitmore was furious. She said these girls sweat their lifeblood to make wealth for respected men while being pushed through the gateway of oppression.
And society was totally hypocritical. The gender double standard demanded purity for women, but excused men entirely.
Right, but these religious women didn't accept that. A holiness tract from Texas actually declared the system depraved and said God's standard applies to men too.
It literally said, your girls have as good a right to curse, chew tobacco, and practice unclean habits as your boys have. That's so combative for 1895.
It's brilliant logic, but here's the paradox. They saw the $3 wage, they saw the hypocrisy, but they refused to join the political lobbies. They didn't march for labor laws.
Which is so confusing today. Why didn't they fight the system?
Because of the lifeboat theology. They believed sin was the root. If you pass a law raising the wage, but the employer's heart is still greedy, he'll just find a new way to exploit workers.
So to them, lobbying city council was like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The ship is still sinking.
Exactly. But even without political lobbying, they built massive infrastructure, standalone outposts, basements, empty factories, and they did it without denominational men telling them what to do.
Running on absolute fumes. The home finished a month with exactly 63 cents, but they paved the way for massive institution building.
The culmination of all this is Aimee Semple McPherson building the Angelus Temple in Los Angeles. A massive permanent structure, entirely because women like Mother Lee proved women could run complex safety nets.
It's an incredible journey. From Mother Lee walking into that brothel to the debates over the statistical Christ, the $3 wage, and the rise of maternalism.
A really complex story of unyielding grit.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We talked about how the Crittenton homes became bureaucratic. Well, in 1976, they merged into the Child Welfare League of America.
Wow.
Yeah. Today, our foster and welfare systems are strictly secular and government-run. But their DNA is intertwined with 19th century women just trying to save souls with soup and soap. It makes you wonder, when a secular government takes over faith-driven maternalism, what gets lost? When we replace mothers with caseworkers, who falls through the cracks today?
Such a powerful question to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.